civil service gone until 70, until 60.
Yes, yes, yes. I think it's a bad idea to retire. I say don't ever retire. I think it's a bad idea.
Professors don't retire, they just fiddle.
Never. You've still got a lot to offer, that's for sure.
Thank you. Mario, is this open to YouTube down streaming, or is this just limited to the Zoom?
It is also live on our YouTube, Bu Dewi, Sat Politik. Yeah. So I think now it is live streaming.
So it will be there permanently, or is this just this one time off?
It will be there permanently in Sat Politik YouTube channel.
Oh.
Yeah. Good morning, Mas Yere.
Hello, Yeri.
Good morning, everyone. Bu Dewi, Professor Napskala, Mbak Emil, Mario. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for accepting our
Indri.
invitation, Yere. We are waiting for Mbak Atika, the head of Research Center for Politics. She will join at 10 past 5.
Good morning, Greta. It's nice to see you again.
Selamat pagi, Pak. Nice to see you again.
Yes.
Been a long time.
Been a long time since I left Griffith in July 2020.
Oh, yes, such a long
Yeah, but
time. Lovely,
I still
lovely to
contact
see
with
the
Andrew.
Apa itu?
I still contact with Andrew. Andrew
Oh,
O'Neill.
good.
Yeah,
Oh,
he moved
good.
to Australian Catholic University.
Yes, yes, he's gone into more executive leadership roles.
Yeah.
Yes, now, but still doing a bit of research on the side, I think.
Yeah.
And so you're attached to Bryn, Amelia, you're attached to Bryn, working for Bryn.
Yes, I'm working for Brin. Actually, I'm in the same team with Ibu Dewi Fortuna Anwar and Mario. We are in the team of in the Indo-Pacific.
Oh, terrific. Oh, very good. It's certainly a lot going on in global politics at the moment. It's almost like changing by the day, isn't it? At the moment, it's incredible.
I mean, there's one thing about researchers, social scientists, political scientists, and so on. It's never a boring moment for us. Unfortunately, the more crisis there is, the more visible you become.
Yeah, absolutely. Incredible.
Good morning, Mbak Atika.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Mbak
Sorry
Atika.
for being late. Thank you for your coming. Okay, Maria, we can start.
Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everyone, distinguished speakers, esteemed colleagues, and valued participants. On behalf of the Research Center for Politics BRIN, it is my great honor to welcome you all to today's webinar on the China factors in Indonesia-Australia relations. My name is Mario Surya Ramadan, and I will serve as your Master of Ceremony and also moderator throughout today's program. This webinar is convened to explore one of the most significant developments in our region, the rise of China and its far-reaching implications for Indonesia-Australia relations. We will examine how this dynamic reshapes political, economic, and security landscapes in Indo-Pacific, highlighting both opportunities and to cooperation and also challenges that require thoughtful responses. We are privileged to be joined by distinguished speakers and experts who will share their insights, helping us better understand the complexities of the dynamics in the Indo-Pacific. We hope that today's discussion should not only enrich our knowledge but also inspire constructive dialogue and also collaborations. To guide us through today's proceedings, allow me to share the program of the webinar. First, we will sing the Indonesian National Anthem, and then opening remarks by our Head of Research Center for Politics, Dr. Atika Nur Alami, and then photo session, keynote address, panel discussions, and questions and answer sessions. To begin, we will sing our national anthems, Indonesia Raya. Mas Soto. Thank you, Mas Otto. We will then will hear welcoming remarks from the Head of Research Center for Politics BRIN, Dr. Atika Nur Alami. Dr. Atika, the screen is yours.
Okay, thank you, Mario. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And good morning, everyone from Jakarta, Indonesia, distinguished keynote speakers and all speakers. We have Prof. Dewi Fortuna Anwar today, our senior at the Research Center for Politics BRIN, and also Dr. Yeremia Lalisang from the Department of International Relations, University of Indonesia, and also Dr. Greta Napps-Keller from the University of Queensland, and Dr. Indriana Kantini, our researcher at the Research Center for Politics, and I think last but not least, Mario Surya Ramadan, our moderator for today's webinar, distinguished participants, a colleague from Research Center for Politics, BRIN, and audiences, maybe esteemed guests, scholars who joined through the Zoom meeting. Welcome to our webinar on the China factors in Indonesia-Australia relation. And this webinar is presented by the Research Center for Politics, BRIN, and Australia Awards. And I think it is a privilege for us to host today's webinar. And I would like to commence by expressing my gratitude for your efforts in elevating our collaboration with the scholars from Indonesia and from Australia. And I think it's a fantastic, kind of event that we try to build our shared interest and knowledge on the role of China in the bilateral relation of Indonesia and Australia as the basis, important knowledge for today's webinar. I think we agree that China nowadays plays a significant and multifaceted role in shaping relation between Indonesia and Australia. China plays roles as a strategic driver that encourage closer bilateral relation and bilateral cooperation, while also creating points of divergence due to differing approaches to Beijing. And as major Indo-Pacific powers, Indonesia and Australia, we know that Indonesia as the region's largest nation and Australia as the key US ally. We try to navigate China's growing economic and military influence, which has become a key factor in their security, defense, and regional stability policies. So we can say that probably China acts as both as a push factor that encourage Indonesia, Australia convergence on security, but also a pull factor that pulling Indonesia toward economic engagement and non-alignment. And this dynamic, I think, has elevated bilateral relations to historic level in recent years, positioning Indonesia and Australia as a stabilizing anchor in the Indo-Pacific in the midst of great power competition. And we will discuss all this issue in today's webinar. And in general, the objectives of this webinar not only to facilitate a deeper understanding on the role and position of China in Indonesia and Australia's foreign policy, but also to promote collaborative research and dialogue between scholars from BRIN, from Indonesia and other universities, including from University of Indonesia and University of Queensland in Australia. And in particular, we are keen to develop more collaboration with universities and research institutions in Southeast Asia, Australia, and probably other parts of the world. And through this webinar, I think we will have a kind of an engagement discussion on this issue, and hopefully we will have a fruitful discussion, and we can discuss all these things and how this of China existing position relate to Indonesia's and Australia foreign policy. I think that's all for me. Again, thank you for joining us in this critical dialogue to advance our knowledge on the influence of external factors, in this sense, great power in the relation of two middle powers. Thank you also and for your efforts in preparing this important webinar. Finally, I think we are extremely grateful for our academic partnership, and we look forward to our next fruitful collaboration. Hope you enjoy the webinar. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Mario.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Mbak Atika, for the welcoming remarks. We will now have the photo session. Please, guests who are still closing the cameras, could you please open the camera, and then we will proceed with the capturing the screen. Mbak Soto, are you ready? Yeah. 3, 2, 1. Yeah. the next screen. 3, oh, yeah. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Thank you very much. Now we are honored to have the keynote speaker for today's webinar. The keynote will be delivered by Professor Dr. Dewi Fortuna Anwar. Ibu Dewi is an academician of the Social Science Commissions of the Indonesian Academy of Science, IP, a research professor at the Research Center for Politics, National Research and Innovation Agency, BRIN, chairman of the board of directors of the Habibie Center, and co-founder of the Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia. In 2001 until 2010, she was Deputy for Social Sciences and Humanities, Indonesian Institute of Science, LIPI, and in 2010 until 2017, Professor Dewi served as a Deputy Secretary for the Vice Presidents of the Republic of Indonesia. She was the POC Rafiah Chairholder at the Institute of Malaysian and International Studies, National University of Malaysia, from April to October 2025. Professor Dewi was a distinguished visiting professor at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, NTU Singapore, from August 2017 until July 2018. The Kippenberger Visiting Chair at the Victoria University of Wellington from October until November 2018, and a distinguished visiting professor at the SAIS Johns Hopkins University in 2007. She has written widely on Indonesia's foreign policy and ASEAN, regional political and security issues. Professor Dewi sits as and has sat in a number of national and international advisory boards. For example, Center for Humanitarian Dialogue in 2019 until 2025, Stockholm International Peace Research Institute in 2010 until 2020, and the UN Secretary General Advisory Board on Disarmament Matters in 2008 until 2012. She obtained her PhD from Monash University, Melbourne, while her master's and bachelor's were from the SOAS University of London. Professor Dewi Fortuna Anwar, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Mario. Good morning, everyone. It is really a great honor and a pleasure to be invited to give a keynote speech to this event organized jointly by BRIN and our Australian counterpart. So it's good morning to all the distinguished panelists, Ibu Greta from Brisbane, Masiere and Mbak Indriana from Jakarta. And thank you very much, Ibu Atika, for that welcome remarks. You've already covered all the bases, so it's not really much for me to say after your brief but very important opening remarks. So we are talking here about the China factors in Indonesia-Australia relations, navigating strategic convergence and divergence. And I think that this is one of the most important topics for us. China has always loomed very large in our region. So we must start with a fundamental historical observation. China has perpetually cast a very large shadow over the geopolitical dynamics of the Asia-Pacific. Long before the contemporary Indo-Pacific paradigm gained prominence, the sheer demographic, economic, and cultural heft of the Middle Kingdom served as the principal gravitational force in our regional order. For the two maritime neighbors, Australia and Indonesia, China has never been a distant variable. Rather, it has constituted the enduring backdrop against which our bilateral narratives unfold. But despite the geographic proximity and the foundational history of collaboration, most notably Australia's substantial support for Indonesia's struggle for independence from Dutch colonial rule between 1945 and 1949, These two nations embody fundamentally divergent strategic cultures. The historical context and national philosophies of Indonesia and Australia have engendered distinct approaches to foreign policy, shaped by their unique experiences and perceptions of their place within their region. To comprehend the China factors today, we must first dissect the distinct historical DNA of Indonesian and Australian foreign policies, recognizing the complexities and nuances that influence the interaction in this increasingly multifaceted international landscape. And as an early student of history, I always believe that without understanding history, we cannot understand contemporary international relations. So let's talk about the divergent origins of the strategic culture and the Cold War. From the proclamation of independence, Indonesia embraced the bebas aktif, or independent and active foreign policy doctrine. Advocated by the first Vice President Muhammad Hatta in 1948, this approach was not one of classic neutrality, but rather a proactive assertion of autonomy intended to avoid being a pawn in the global power dynamics of the era. Indonesia endeavored to row between two reefs, preserving its agency while steering clear of formal entanglements with the superpower blocs. In contrast, Australia's strategic culture was shaped by the crucible of World War II and the subsequent Cold War, characterized by an enduring fear of abandonment by its great powers protectors, initially the United Kingdom and later the United States. This apprehension fostered an unwavering commitment to Western alignment under the AUKUS Treaty of 1955, which solidified diplomatic, military, and intelligence cooperation among the signatories. These divergent worldviews engendered a pronounced contrast in their initial interactions with the People's Republic of China, or the PRC. While Indonesia approached its relationship with China with a spirit of cautious optimism, seeking mutual benefit and engagement, Australia's pragmatic stance was heavily influenced by its alliance commitments and geopolitical considerations in the region. As a result, the two nations' respective foreign policies reflected not only their historical experiences, but also their aspirations for the future, setting the stage for complex diplomatic maneuverings in the Indo-Pacific landscape. Now, from the very beginning, Australia saw the ascent of the PRC as a direct security threat, sustained diplomatic relations with the Republic of China, or ROC, in Taiwan for over 2 decades. It is noteworthy that Australia had previously established diplomatic ties with the Nationalist Republic of China government under the Kuomintang and General Chiang Kai-shek since 1941. When the Communist Party, led by Chairman Mao Zedong, assumed control of mainland China and established the PRC, Canberra continued to acknowledge the non-Communist Republic of China that had relocated to Taiwan. It was not until December 1972, following the election of the Whitlam government and the consequential transformation to United Nations representations, that Canberra shifted its recognition to Beijing. In contrast, Indonesia formalized diplomatic relations with the PRC as early as 1950, adhering to a one China policy from the outset. Now, we know that during the 1960s, under the President Sukarno, Jakarta developed an exceptionally close ideological and strategic partnership with Beijing, culminating in the Jakarta-Beijing axis. This period saw Jakarta and Canberra viewing each other with profound hostility, as Australia viewed Indonesia's revolutionary rhetoric and proximity to communism as a threat to regional stability. The rise of the New Order government under General Suharto in 1966 brought a sudden strategic convergence between Australia and Indonesia. So, driven by the internal anti-communist move, Indonesia froze diplomatic relations with China in 1967 that lasted until 1990. And during this interval, both Jakarta and Canberra viewed China as a common threat, which helped to improve bilateral relations between the two geographically close neighboring countries. However, it is imperative to acknowledge that even amid periods of a shared perception of threat, the relations between Indonesia and Australia have been consistently resembling a roller coaster. They are indeed strange neighbors, divided by cultural, religious, and political systems. This is particularly true during the New Order period when Indonesia is led by an authoritarian regime. Less differences under the current democratic system in Indonesia, but the two countries are still very different. While a mutual perspective on China may facilitate diplomatic engagement, it has seldom been the exclusive or even the predominant factor in influencing the vitality of this bilateral relationship between Indonesia and Australia. Now let's turn to the economic dilemma of asymmetry and coercion. Coming to the current era, the rise of China is perceived as a paradox, a source of unprecedented economic opportunity, while also a looming strategic challenge. Both Jakarta and Canberra have sought to tap into China's vast market, but their experiences have diverged sharply in recent years. Indonesia has invited large-scale Chinese investment as a cornerstone of its national development strategy. Under the administration of President Joko Widodo and continuing under President Prabowo Subianto, China has become the largest foreign investor in Indonesia's infrastructure and its critical nickel downstreaming sector. By 2024, Chinese funded smelters in Morowali and Weda Bay allowed Indonesia to dominate over 50% of the global nickel supply. While there are valid concerns regarding asymmetrical dependence and debt trap narratives, these have not led Jakarta to reduce its economic ties. On the contrary, Indonesia views its engagement as essential for its Golden Indonesia 2045 or Indonesia Emas 2045 vision. For Jakarta, the economic benefits are regarded as a tool of statecraft to ensure China has a vested interest in Indonesia's stability. Australia's experience has been more bruising. Following Canberra's 2020 call for an independent inquiry into the origins of COVID-19, Beijing launched a campaign of economic coercion, placing trade barriers on Australian wine, barley, coal, and lobster. While most of these restrictions have been lifted by 2026, the psychological impact remains. Australia has learned the hard way the risk of overexposure to a single market, leading to a policy of de-risking and a more cautious, security-first approach to Chinese investment, particularly in critical minerals and telecommunications. Now, I look briefly at the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative nexus between industrial synergy versus strategic hedging. The divergent reaction to China's Belt and Road initiatives offers perhaps the most illuminating illustration of the contrasting strategic imperatives in Jakarta and Canberra. For Indonesia, the BAI has been pragmatically assimilated into the national developmental agenda as a catalyst for industrial transformation. Jakarta has prioritized the hilirisasi or nickel downstreaming policy, harnessing Chinese capital to establish a comprehensive electric vehicle or EV battery ecosystem. By 2026, Chinese enterprises will command approximately 75% of Indonesia's nickel smelting capacity, with a cumulative investment of over USD 65 billion in the past decade. I think Masieri will probably talk more about this later. In stark contrast, Australia's engagement with the BRI has transitioned from cautious participation to active securitization. While the Victorian state government signed a BRI Memorandum of Understanding in 2018, the federal government subsequently invoked the Foreign Relations Act 2020 to annul the agreement, citing its incongruence with national foreign policy. Canberra perceived the BRI not merely as an infrastructure initiative, but as a geostrategic instrument capable of engendering coercive leverage. Interestingly, by 2026, we've seen a triangular economic paradigm beginning to materialize. Acknowledging the perils of excessive dependence on a Chinese-dominated supply chain, Indonesia and Australia have started exploring synergies between Indonesia's nickel and Australia's lithium reserve. This protective lithium-nickel alliance aspires to forge a more resilient EV supply chain that capitalizes on BI-funded infrastructure in Indonesia while adhering to the stringent ESG or environmental, social, and governance standards demanded by Australia and global investors. This signifies a maturation in the approach of both nations as they try to address the advantages of China's ascent while collectively mitigating its inherent structural risks. Now, moreover, as the geopolitical landscape continues to evolve, both Indonesia and Australia are increasingly attuned to the imperatives of climate change and sustainable development. The growing interest in renewable energy technologies not only complements their respective resource advantages, but also enhances their diplomatic relations and economic collaborations within the context of the broader Indo-Pacific region. Australia is supporting Indonesia's Just Energy Transition Partnership, or GEPT, through a 200 million Australian initiative, Kinetic, that is the Australia-Indonesia Climate Infrastructure Partnership. So by strategically aligning their resources and enhancing mutual investment, both nations are at the brink of creating a robust framework that probably would help to mitigate reliance on Chinese supply chains, but also at the same time promote a greener future. Now let us look at strategic friction, the South China Sea and AUKUS. In the realm of security, both nations are deeply concerned by China's increasing assertiveness in the South China Sea. However, their methods of response illustrate the persistent divide in their strategic cultures. Indonesia has developed more multi-layered engagement. Jakarta prioritizes engagement through both bilateral and ASEAN-led mechanisms. It relies on the Indonesia-China Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, as well as the ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific and ASEAN-led regional mechanism to socialize China into the regional norms. Indonesia refuses to be drawn into a containment logic, fearing that such a binary choice would erode its bebas active credentials. On the other hand, Australia has consistently pursued hard deterrence. Australia has doubled down on its security alliance with the United States, participating in the Quad alongside India and Japan, and the AUKUS submarine deals partnership. These are viewed in Canberra as essential balance of power mechanisms to prevent Chinese hegemony. Jakarta has been notably critical of AUKUS. Indonesian policymakers have expressed significant concerns that AUKUS could undermine the integrity of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and that it could trigger a regional arms race, as well as heighten the risk of conflict in Indonesia's immediate maritime backyard. Yet, we see a sophisticated nuance in Indonesia's stance. While Jakarta criticizes AUKUS, it also does not want the regional architecture to be dominated by China. At Indonesia's behest, the East Asia Summit, launched in 2005, was intentionally widened to include Australia, India, and New Zealand, and later the US and Russia. This omni-enmeshment strategy by Indonesia ensures a dynamic equilibrium in which no single power holds sway over the regional order. So in conclusion, are we moving toward a new strategic autonomy? In recent years, it has become evident that Indonesia-Australia relations are arguably closer and have less tumultuous relationship than they have been in decades. The signing of the Defense Cooperation Agreement in 2024, the most consequential security accord in our bilateral history, marks a significant maturation of our partnership. We share numerous strategic perspectives, a commitment to maritime security, an unwavering belief in ASEAN centrality, and a mutual aspiration for a stable, rules-based Indo-Pacific. However, we must approach this reality with pragmatism. The strategic cultures remain fundamentally divergent. Indonesia continues to underscore its bebas active status, while Australia remains firmly anchored to its alliance with the United States. Nevertheless, an interesting convergence may be on the horizon. Amid the prevailing uncertainty regarding US commitments to its military allies, and the rise of America First protectionism, Australia may find itself gravitating closer to Indonesia's stance. We may witness a shared emphasis on strategic autonomy, a regional order in which middle powers like Indonesia and Australia assume greater responsibility for their own security, free from the caprices of great powers. So the China challenge is not merely a dilemma to be resolved, but rather a condition to be adeptly managed. By nurturing academic and policy dialogues through seminars such as this one, held in the spirit of fostering mutual understanding, we ensure that although our cultures may differ, our communications remains unequivocally clear. As we engage in these discussions, it is imperative that we remain cognizant of the broader geopolitical landscape and the complexities it entails, positioning ourselves to navigate future uncertainties with more insight and foresight. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Dewi Fortuna Anwar, for the very comprehensive but also deep keynote address, who provide a strong foundation for our discussion today. Professor Anwar highlighted how China and how China's enduring geopolitical weight shapes Indonesia-Australia relations. We must not forget the importance of to understand the history in the region, also each country, and Indonesia and Australia has historical divergence and also different in economic dimension and also security outlook, but now relations are closer. Yet the strategic culture remains distinct, with Indonesia prioritizing autonomy and Australia alliance dependence, but both countries may converge toward a greater strategic autonomy as US reliability wanes and managing rather than resolving the China challenges. So thank you, Ibu Dewi, for the keynote address. Now we will proceed to the panel discussions. We have three speakers, Dr. Arditya Edward Yeremia Lalisang, and then Dr. Greta Napskeller, and Dr. Indriana Kartini. Each speaker will cover different topics. The first speaker, Dr. Yeremia Lalisang, will examine the China's strategic interests in the Asia-Pacific and how they shape its relationship with Indonesia and Australia. Dr. Greta Napskeller will cover the Australia's China policy and its implication on Australia relations with Indonesia. And the last one, Dr. Indriana Kartini will explain Indonesia's strategic autonomy and the China-Australia Balancing Act, analyze the Jakarta's approach to maintaining strategic autonomy amid intensifying China-US rivalry. The first speaker, Dr. Arditya Edward Yeremia Lalisang, is an assistant professor in the Department of International Relations at the Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, Universitas Indonesia. He also served as a research fellow at the Asia Research Center at the Universitas Indonesia. He earned his PhD from the School of International Relations and the Research School of Southeast Asian Studies at Xiamen University. His research focuses on the various dimensions of levels of China's rising influence, with a particular emphasis on Southeast Asia. His work has been published in the Pacific Review, International Journal of China Studies, International Journal of Asian Studies, Asian Perspective, Asia Pacific Viewpoint, Asia-Europe Journal, and other academic journals. Dr. Yeremia Lalisang, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much, Pak Mario, for the kind introductions. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me today. My name is Yeremia Lalisang. I'm now based at the Department of International Relations, Universitas Indonesia. I hope I'm audible. There has been, some kind of disturbance here with my connections due to power breakout. I don't know why there is a power breakout suddenly So please let me know if you cannot hear my voice. So I believe this is my very first opportunity to be in the same panel with Dr. Nafs Keller and Dr. Indriani. I'm very honored to be here sharing my perspective with you, and I believe I will soon meet Dr. Nafs Keller quite frequent because the Department of International Relations will establish its joint degree agreement with IR University of Queensland. And I hope this joint degree agreement between these two universities will contribute significantly to the Indonesia-Australia relations. Yeah, so since the pandemic, my research has focused primarily on Chinese investment in Indonesia, particularly in the extractive industry and critical mineral sectors. This is why I'd like to bring this topic to the table. I want to explore how Indonesia-China cooperations in renewable energy and mineral processing sector has become interestingly dynamic and how Australia might want to perceive these developments. And I should declare upfront that my research focuses on Indonesia-China relations primarily, not Indonesia-Australia relations. So I'm here in the positions to learn from Dr. Neps Skyler, Mbak Indri, and of course from Ibu Dewi on how Indonesia might navigate its relationship with Australia with considerations of its relations with China as well. So let me begin with the first slide. Uh, so the Belt and Road Initiative has appeared less frequently in our headlines and media coverage, at least here in Indonesia. However, a report by Christoph Nadepil, published just this month from the University of Griffith, tells us a different story. So I'm benefit a lot by this report. This report highlights how 2025 was a record-breaking year for the Belt and Road Initiative. We are looking at 100 billions of investment in construction sector and another 80.2 billion in investment, the highest figures we've ever seen since the inaugurations of the Belt and Road Initiative globally in 2013. And so where's this money going? Primarily into two sectors, which are energy as well as mining and metals. 2025 was simultaneously the dirtiest and the greenest years for Belt and Road energy engagement because we see an increase Chinese investment in oil and gas sector, but Chinese engagement in the energy project, especially in the renewable energy initiative, also reached new records of 18.3 billion, bigger than we've ever seen before. And who's behind this investment? I think right now we are seeing more and more private companies, private sector companies from China leading the investment. And while state-owned enterprises maintain its dominant position in construction sector. Next slide, please. So China's Belt and Road Initiative engagement in 2025 was far from evenly distributed across regions. We see here in the construction sector, Africa saw a massive surge, and Southeast Asia also experienced significant growth, rising 81% to 12.7 billion, and Latin America also saw a moderate increase. Meanwhile, the Pacific and East Asia experienced sharp declines. And when we turn to investment pattern, the picture shifts slightly. Central Asia emerged as the largest recipient of Chinese capital, but Southeast Asia secured the second position ahead of Africa. Taken together, these figures reveal Southeast Asia's strategic positions in China's calculations. If not the top priority, Southeast Asia is certainly a critical region for China to engage with. The next slide. China's energy engagement through the Belt and Road Initiative has expanded dramatically as well. In 2025, total energy engagement more than doubled compared to the previous year. And we are seeing a green energy and hydropower engagement increase by 74%. Within the green energy space, wind, solar, waste to energy projects are dominating Chinese investment, and hydropower continues to serve as a complementary renewable sources in this mix. But here's the most striking trend. Green energy investment surged nearly 4 times in just 1 year. while constructions in renewable also grew. The investment accelerations tell us something important about where China sees future opportunity. This expansion in green energy engagements become particularly relevant when we look at Southeast Asia and especially Indonesia, where renewable energy development has become national priority. And let me share my perspective about what is actually drive this green energy and expansion from the Beijing perspective. The first factor is purely domestic. China faces a structural oversupply in solar panels, batteries, and other green technology. And simply put, domestic productions far exceeds demands, and Chinese companies need overseas market to absorb this excess capacity. And there was also a policy shift in February 2025. There is this new document number 136 on uh, issued by National Development and Reform Commissions and National Energy Administrations. So this policy changed the rules of the games because right now the renewable energy companies has to align with market mechanism rather than enjoying a fixed tariff and guarantee procurement from the government side. So meaning that the Chinese government is trying to push this green renewable energy companies to respond more to the market mechanism rather than enjoying subsidies to expand their businesses. So what does it mean? Domestic competitions become even more fierce between those companies. Companies that thrive under the old subsidy regime now face market pressure, and companies that cannot survive, of course, they need to find some other market in Southeast Asia to sustain their operations. At the same time, there is also a geopolitical window open up. Many countries deepen their clean technology cooperations with China, particularly following the US tariff. Meanwhile, US clean energy investment fell by 36% as the administration scaled back climate commitments. China is now in a position to fill this gap. And the recent trends clearly indicates that Chinese firms are not just exporting products; they are building the entire ecosystem. They favor to dominate the they favor to integrate the upstream and downstream supply chains, just like what the Chinese company BYD and CATL do in Indonesia in EV manufacturing hub. The Chinese get an access to the upstream sector with the nickel processing sector in Indonesia because our country is rich in the nickel resource. And at the same time, they are now starting to build EV factories or battery storage system factories in Indonesia. So this kind of integrations really the thing that the Chinese companies are looking into right now. And Indonesia has been quite responsive with this new Chinese Chinese initiative. And for example, the picture on your left-hand side is the Asia's largest solar panel in Indonesia right now, located in Cirata. Is very close to Purwakarta. It's Asia largest, and it is procured from China. And of course, Indonesia just inaugurated President Prabowo just inaugurated this large manufacturing hub for EV battery in Indonesia. Of course, this is the Chinese investment. So from Jakarta perspective, the Chinese interest in green energy and material processing sector present a significant opportunity. Indonesia sees Chinese investment as a pathway to upgrade its positions in the global EV supply chains, just like Ibu Dewi mentioned in her keynote speech, Ibu Dewi has already described how Indonesia, how Jakarta, especially under President Joko Widodo, try to integrate China-led BRI into our national development agenda. The main focus is to upgrade our industrial situations, to transform our industry sector, and to upgrade our positions in the global supply chain, especially in the EV battery sector. And China, of course, driven by domestic push and also shaped by the intense rivalry between itself and the US, try to also benefit from the situation, especially the situations where the status where Indonesia is the largest, having the largest nickel reserve in the world. However, our cooperations with China, especially in the nickel downstreaming sector, has transformed into this kind of situations where we see China dominate all the financing mechanism, uh, and China also dominate the majority of ownership between the companies who are operating in the nickel downstreaming sector, and we also depend on China supplied technology. China technology is used in the 90% of nickel smelters now operating in Indonesia. And no wonder President Joko Widodo, in his last State of Union address, he described China's investment as fast and precise, meaning that China become a reliable partner in delivering what Indonesia need to upgrade its industrial sector. So this is the very first thing that we need to take into consideration with our cooperations with China. And the other thing is, my observation, there is this kind of entanglement between Indonesia's export to China and FDI from China. So we receive large, massive capital influx from China. And of course, China's largest FDI in Indonesia, especially during the 1 decade of Jokowi presidency, goes into our nickel smelters. And the result is we are now having a massive industrial park in the eastern part of Indonesia, particularly concentrated in Central Sulawesi, Southeast Sulawesi, and North Maluku. It is important to note that the major outputs of our nickel processing centers right now is still ferronickels, rolled stainless steel, nickel matte. What does it mean? These three major outputs really tells that we are still far, far away from the industrial upgrade that we seek by inviting more and more Chinese capital into our nickel sector. And what is also important to note that 98% of these major outputs are being exported back to China. And suddenly, China has become Indonesia's largest steel export market, and Indonesia has become the world's fourth largest steel exporter. So without Chinese support, without investment from China, Indonesia, if you check the data from available online, of course, before the hilirisasi, before the nickel downstreaming, Indonesia was, out of the top 10 list of world steel exporter, HS 72. But if you check the data in 2024, Indonesia suddenly became the world fourth largest steel exporter. So this kind of, circle back to China, we receive a lot of investment from China. We create the products. Of course, there is a benefit there because investment from China create jobs for the locals in Indonesia, especially in the eastern part of Indonesia, where we can see the largest nickel processing center over there. It creates some economic growth, yeah. Central Sulawesi, Northwest Sulawesi, North Maluku, you can check the data, has experienced double-digit economic growth in the past, how to say, 8 years, if I'm not mistaken. So of course, there is this kind of economic benefit from this Chinese investment. But let's not forget that what we create, again, back to China for China own benefit as well. And let's also not forget that this nickel downstreaming also creates socio-environmental costs. The next slide. People at the local level experience loss of livelihood, and they are struggling with air and water pollutions resulted from the heavy activities of nickel processing and the coal-fired power plant, which become the major sources of electricity for this industrial complex to operate. So this is also something that we need to also highlight in our cooperations with China in nickel downstreaming sector. Next slide, please. So with all this, increased dependence on China in nickel downstreaming sector in Indonesia, I I wish the Jakarta has to bring geopolitical calculations back in. In my view, close engagement with China is not problematic. What is problematic is our close engagement with China has has somehow conducted at the expense of our engagement with the other great powers, and especially our neighboring partners here in Australia. So what I'm trying to suggest here, Indonesia need to diversify its engagement, especially in the critical mineral sectors. But let's not forget that sometimes, in some cases, certainly in many cases, available alternative partners are limited. While Indonesia may appear to deliberately seek closer relations with China, these options could also be predetermined by external circumstances. Let's not forget that in the COVID-19 pandemic, for example, in trying to procure COVID-19 vaccines as soon as possible, Jakarta had knocked every door, but not every doors open, and not those behind the doors responds to Indonesia's request. And I want to say this. I want to use this word. Fortunately, China had been quick enough to respond and become also one of the reliable sources of our vaccine at that time. But as we see, our vaccine procurement structure is actually is very diversified, because China not become the dominant source of our vaccine. If I'm not mistaken, we only procure 40% of our vaccine from China. So the rest of 60%, we managed to diversify our partners. So bringing geopolitical calculations back in is to try to find to diversify our partner, especially in this critical minerals and green energy sector. And the last slide from me is, and then how we should think of Australian positions in this dynamic. The reality is straightforward. Australia has lost its competitive edge to Indonesia-China partnership, particularly in the nickel processing sector. Chinese companies now control over 70% of Indonesia's nickel refining capacity, and the surge in Indonesian productions backed by Chinese investment has devastated Australia's nickel industry. So the questions for Australia is, what's the path forward? Is it possible for Australia to ride the wave of Indonesia-China close partnership in green energy and nickel processing sector? Is it still possible? Is our nickel market still attractive to our Australian partners? So this is something that Jakarta really need to figure out if Jakarta if Jakarta is committed in diversify its engagement partner. But from an Indonesian point of view, right now, I think Indonesia need for credible diversification partner to achieve its goal in upgrading its industrial sector and to achieve its goal to contribute more to the climate actions through promoting renewable energy and through promoting green development in the country itself. So I think I stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mas Yere, for your very insightful presentations. Dr. Yere has explored the evolving dynamics of China's Belt and Roads Initiative and its implications for Indonesia and Australia, and also the Indo-Pacific regions, with a particular focus on energy, in industrial transformations, and strategic positioning. He touched upon the BRI, which marked the highest ever engagement, and then there is a geographic shift where Africa saw the largest surge, and then Southeast Asia rose significantly, remains strategic vital in China's calculation. The green energy investment quadrupled in 1 year, but then China also dominates financing, ownership, and technology transfer in nickel downstreaming, but also there is a socio-environmental cost to the Indonesia. And Dr. Yere argued that we must bring the geopolitical calculation back. Indonesia's deep entanglement with China is both opportunity and also risk, and diversification is needed, but is still limited. Jakarta has to seek for credible partners to balance the China domination in nickel downstreaming industries. But the question is what role can Australia play in the and as a credible, can Australia offer as a credible diversification partner, especially in critical minerals? Thank you, Mas Yere. And then the next speaker is Dr. Greta Napskeller. Dr. Greta Napskeller is the Associate Director, Defense, Space and National Security, based at the University of Queensland's Strategic Partnerships Office. Dr. Greta is responsible for senior level partnership management, positioning the university for strategic investments and growing the university's collaborations across the defense, space and national security sectors. Dr. Greta has broad experience working for the national security community in international policy, analytical, linguist and also consulting roles. She has more than 30 years as an Indonesian specialist with specific research interests spanning Australia-Indonesia relations, Indonesian foreign policy, Indonesia-China relations, regional multilateralism, and Indonesian defense and security policy. Dr. Greta also contributes her expertise in Southeast Asian and Indo-Pacific strategic dynamics to executive and higher education programs. Australia awards Indonesia short courses, PhD supervision, journal publications, and media and think tank analysis. Dr. Greta's engagement and research activities are supported by research affiliations with University of Queensland's School of Political Science and International Studies. Dr. Greta, screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Bapak Mario Ramadan. Firstly, Bapak-bapak dan ibu-ibu yang terhormat, selamat pagi. Sebetulnya selamat siang dari Brisbane ya di Australia. Pertama-tama saya ingin mengucapkan terima kasih pada tim Pusat Riset Politik BRIN dan khususnya Ibu Atika dan Bapak Mario Ramadan. Terus BRIN adalah kemitraan yang penting buat UQ dengan kolaborasi di berbagai bidang termasuk biomedicine, pertanian dan kesehatan. Terus saya ingin mengakui pembicara dan teman lama yang ada hari ini dan terlibat dalam acara ini, Ibu Dewi Fortuna Anwar Dr. Indriana Kartini and Bapak Yeri Lalisang ganti dalam bahasa Inggris ya. I also would like to acknowledge the Australia Awards Indonesia, a very important leadership program funded by our Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and DFAT, and have worked very closely with the Australia Awards over the years. And also just to pick up what Bapak Yeri mentioned about the significance of the UE-UQ partnership. The UE Rector and our Vice Chancellor launched a new UE-UQ collaboration centre last year. So we're looking forward to elevating engagement across a range of areas, and I'm sure in the international relations and political science. So thank you. So I've been asked today to discuss Australia's shifting China strategy from engagement to strategic competition. I think the first thing I'd say is that engagement and competition are not mutually exclusive dynamics in Australia-China relations. That is, that the relationship hasn't shifted from engagement to strategic competition so much. Certainly, contemporary Australia-China relations are characterised by engagement through the imperative to maintain a vital trade and economic relationship, but it is strategic anxiety or fear rather than competition, I think, at the bilateral level at least, that characterises Australia's relationship with China. Australia is, after all, a very small country from China's perspective, and hence there is no real strategic competition unless we see Australia as part of a broader alliance framework with the US at the centre of that. Now, what lies behind the strategic anxiety? It rests on Australia's perception of China as a deeply revisionist, global and Indo-Pacific regional power. Now, I might note, as I did in the conversations preceding the formal commencement of this session today, that, you know, ironically, it's the US that is looking much more like a revisionist power and China more like a status quo power. And that's something we can pick up later. Events are moving very, very quickly. I'll talk about that in a moment. The anxiety from Australia's part is spurred by China's coercive maritime conduct, pervasive cyber intrusions, interference in Australia's domestic political affairs and institutions, broader espionage activities, and of course its diplomatic and material support to Moscow in its war of aggression against Ukraine. Ibu Dewi has picked up on some of the things I'm going to talk about, but the contemporary Australia-China relationship can be marked by two distinct phases: the bilateral relationship prior to the COVID-19 pandemic and the relationship in the post-pandemic period. So pre-COVID, it was clear, certainly before March, April 2020, that the Australian government knew it was dealing with a very different China under Xi Jinping. The Prime Minister at the time, Malcolm Turnbull, had banned Huawei from Australia's 5G telecommunications infrastructure, as Ibu Dewi noted, over security concerns. And in 2017, it introduced foreign interference and espionage legislation through the Parliament. Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull had also repeatedly stressed to Beijing the importance of the sovereign rights of states and the need for peaceful dialogue and dispute resolution with regard to South China Sea territorial claims. And this is something, of course, that Indonesia has been stressing, but perhaps not as overtly at times as Canberra has. As the COVID-19 pandemic started to impact globally, Scott Morrison went a little ahead of some of what our Asian neighbours would have done, and he called for an independent international inquiry into the origins of COVID-19. And now Ibu Dewi mentioned this. 2 days later, he then suggested that the World Health Organization needed tough new weapons inspectors' powers to investigate what caused the outbreak. So, as you can imagine, this did not go down well in Beijing. And it's from that point that Australia was on the rough end of Beijing's wolf warrior diplomacy and sweeping trade restrictions on barley, beef, coal, copper, cotton, seafood, sugar, timber, wine, and more, worth around 25 billion, or about 1.3% of Australia's GDP in 2019. So it was the Australian Prime Minister's forthright comments in that April 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic, which marked an unprecedented deterioration in Australia-China relations. Moreover, the Morrison government's hawkish approach on regional strategic issues and willingness to call out China's aggression and military build-up further strained relations with China. The relationship since the election of the Albanese government, which was sworn in May 2022, has stabilised the relationship with China, but it's not normalised it, and this is important. Australia's official policy mantra on China has become much more overt on the challenges, and I'm going to quote here from some key policy documents. This is the government's policy mantra. Australia will cooperate with China where we can, disagree where we must, and engage in the national interest. The DFAT, Foreign Affairs Trade Policy documents state, quote, in our engagement with China, we work in support of the welfare of our citizens, the rights and freedoms of those who live in Australia, and our strategic security and trade interests. The DFAT foreign policy fact sheet refers to risk-informed engagement with China. So this is quite overt, and this is in the public domain. I'd say the important change for me as an analyst that's looked at Indonesia-Australia relations over many decades, and China as a key factor in that, is that now, as Indonesia has long been accustomed to, Australia is dealing also with a pervasive China challenge with domestic political and foreign policy dimensions. Australia is now home to a significant mainland Chinese diaspora community. It's the third highest percentage of overseas-born residents now in Australia, and with that comes growing electoral influence or political influence. At the regional level, China's economic, political, and strategic influence is pervasive, and I'm talking about Southeast Asia and the Pacific Island countries here. China has everywhere proclaimed the Lowy 2025 Lowy Institute Southeast Asia Influence Index. China, quote, is the most influential power overall, the leading power for most countries. It leads with economic relationships, but backs this with consistent diplomacy across the region. And I think Masieri has recognised some of this in the China's success in economic engagement with Indonesia around nickel and renewable energies. Like Indonesia, of course, the economic significance of China is immense for Australia. China is Australia's largest two-way trading partner. It accounts for around 25% of Australia's goods and services and trade with the world, focused largely around iron ore, which was largely exempt from those trade restrictions I mentioned earlier, concentrates, gas, education, and coal. China's the 8th largest foreign direct investor in Australia, lower than it is for Indonesia. And it's also the largest source of overseas students for Australia. So from the Australian university perspective, this, and a touch more on my professional experience now, represents a fascinating microcosm of the larger challenges in Australia-China relations. So Australian universities are dependent on revenue from Chinese international students to cross-subsidise their R&D, but at the same time, they're forced to contend with the associated challenges to free speech. What do I mean by that? I mean coercion on students by Chinese diplomatic missions and forces back within mainland China, pressure on lecturers to soften or change content around discussion of South China Sea and other contentious issues, and on occasion, including my own university, on-campus violent protests. In the post-pandemic era, risk-informed engagement with China requires universities to increasingly comply with a raft of regulations and legislations designed to counter China's on-campus foreign interference and espionage activity. So that's a microcosm of the broader, the larger macro picture in Australia-China relations. I now want to look at how Australia's perceptions of China shapes defence, trade and regional cooperation with Indonesia. So Australia has watched China's influence expand in both Southeast Asia and the Pacific Island countries with unease, Beijing has concluded or attempted to conclude comprehensive security agreements with Pacific Island states, including the deployment of paramilitary personnel. It has sought access to ports throughout the Pacific. We might think of Vanuatu and other countries. Southeast Asia, we can think of Ream naval base in Cambodia and approaches to Timor-Leste and beyond, and has been very successful in what scholars have described as elite capture. Partly in response, but not solely in response to China's growing influence, the Albanese government further prioritised Southeast Asia and the Pacific Island countries in policy terms. The government reaffirmed ASEAN centrality, evident in the 2024 ASEAN-Australia Special Summit. The new ASEAN-Australia Centre was established, which is focused on driving business, education, cultural and community connections between Australia and the region. I want to touch on, I guess, what was a bit of a game changer. Being a long-term analyst of Australia-Indonesia relations, the 2023 invested Australia's Southeast Asia economic strategy to 2024, I think was long overdue and was a recognition that Australia's trade, business and investment relationship with Southeast Asia was seriously underdone. And Masiari has alluded to that. What was different about this strategy? It was comprehensive. It was authored by former Macquarie Bank executive Nicholas Moore, and it sought to mobilise the private sector in economic engagement and greater alignment with the region's development priorities. As Pak Yeri and Ibu Dewi have mentioned, it identified complementarities with Indonesian green energy, EV battery supply chains, we've heard of lithium and nickel synergies there, agricultural, health and digital transformation. It also included new initiatives like a Southeast Asia investment financing facility to around $2 billion and a lot of other policy mechanisms and entities to support the implementation of that economic strategy. Leaving aside AUKUS, which I'll address shortly, the Australia-China relationship is in itself not a particular source of friction between Australia and Indonesia, but there is quiet concern in Canberra, at least in my opinion. I can't prove this, but in my opinion, that Indonesia viewed traditionally as a bulwark or a strategic buffer against China in maritime Southeast Asia, and specifically in Beijing's ability to extend its political and maritime influence in the region, has under Joko Widodo and President Prabowo drifted closer to Beijing. There are around 4 key developments in late 2024 and 2025 which signalled a concerning shift in Indonesia's foreign policy approach and which even upended some enduring orthodoxies in Indonesian foreign policy. These were, and I'll be fairly quick, the October 2024 Indonesia's announcement of a joint maritime development agreement with China, referencing overlapping claims. It also caused great consternation in Jakarta foreign policy circles. Indonesia's decision November 2024 to pursue full membership of the BRICS grouping. The new naval exercise with Russia, but also the resumption of TN exercises with the PLA, which had been informally delayed, perhaps not suspended, but perhaps delayed for some time. And I guess more recently last year, Shafri Shamsuddin, Menhan's announcement that Indonesia might proceed with the procurement of 42 J-10 fighters from China. Now, this announcement seems to have subsequently been withdrawn, coincidentally or not, around the time of Pete Hegseth's October 2025 visit to Jakarta. So there may be some links there to what kind of pressure and leverage the US is applying to Indonesia with regards to lowering tariffs and what kind of strategic leverage they can use out of that. Now, Canberra's been managing its strategic anxiety about China by deepening its collective security and advanced technology partnerships with allies and partners principally through minilateral frameworks. So we think of AUKUS Pillar 1, the nuclear submarine program, but of course there's also AUKUS Pillar 2, which is often overlooked, which is the advanced collaboration on advanced technology areas. If we think hypersonics, AI, robotics, quantum, information warfare. And of course the Quad, under a bit of pressure because of Trump's rough treatment of India in particular. So alarm over China's behaviour was, of course, a key driver behind the AUKUS agreement announced in September 2021. Through AUKUS, Australia sought integration into the US industrial base, access to the most sensitive nuclear technologies, and would host increased rotation of nuclear-powered Virginia-class submarines through Western Australia's Stirling Naval Base, providing an important strategic deterrent to China. As Ibu Dewi said, the announcement of the AUKUS agreement created deep unease in Indonesia, raised concerns, escalated strategic rivalries, created doubts about Australia's compliance with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, but there are also safety and environmental concerns about an accident, a nuclear submarine mishap in Indonesia's waters. But beyond AUKUS friction, and again, Ibu Dewi picked this up, Australia's strategic anxiety is also driving closer cooperation with regional states, including Indonesia. So this is important. It's not mutually exclusive. These dynamics are happening concurrently. Prioritizing partnerships in the Indo-Pacific is listed as one of the immediate priorities of Australia's 2024 National Defence Strategy. The National Defence Strategy recognised Indonesia as an essential and enduring partner and committed to deepening the complexity of security cooperation. And Ibu Dewi has mentioned the Australia-Indonesia Defence Cooperation Treaty, a treaty-level Defence Cooperation Agreement for the very first time. But of course, more recently, we've also seen a treaty on common security announced by Jakarta and Canberra, which invokes the Suharto-Keating Agreement on Maintaining Security of 1995 and commits both parties to consult, very much like the ANZUS alliance agreement, to consult, not act, but to consult. So I'll just conclude my comments here on areas of alignment and policy implications. As a result of the global realignment and rupture created by a rogue American administration, Australia and Indonesia are entering a dangerous new period in international politics, and both countries need to integrate the realities of this new global disorder in policy terms quickly. As Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney stated at Davos, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And as if sensing Australia's fear of abandonment, as Ibu Dewi mentioned before, by its powerful US ally, the Chinese ambassador just this month warned Australia that it must accept the reunification of Taiwan or face no forgiveness. With doubts about the extent that the US will continue to be the region's security guarantor or act as a broader stabilizing force constraining Chinese power projection. And again, things have been upended because it's the US that needs to be constrained increasingly in its behaviour. But Indonesia and Australia as two significant regional middle powers, we must work together more closely, and this is acknowledging the breadth and depth of the bilateral relation, but the relationship at the bilateral and multilateral level. But it's also about preserving strategic autonomy, as my previous panelists have already mentioned, and elevating national resilience within regional resilience centred in ASEAN. It's easier said than done, as we know, because ASEAN, faces some intramural challenge and great external pressures. So just some last comments. So in a might means right international order, I think there's some pressing policy considerations for Indonesia and Australia. Start with the Deputy Sheriff. Australia needs to move away from its 80-year strategic dependency on the US. And this can only be really achieved through cooperative regionalism and enhanced relationships between Australia and its neighbours. This is already evident in new security treaties and enhanced economic engagement. So the Australian government is obviously moving ahead on this. Australia and Indonesia, though, should also elevate cooperation with like-minded powers in the broader Indo-Pacific, Japan, Singapore, Republic of Korea, etc., and certainly beyond to Canada and Europe. And these are, I don't need to tell the Indonesian and Australian government, what they should be doing. They're already doing this anyway, but I think we have to look at things very carefully, and things need to be elevated and expedited. Similarly, I'd say talented diplomats in Indonesia's foreign ministry, Kemlu, should be given greater latitude by the president and his influential inner circle to engage in creative middle power diplomacy, what they're very good at and excel at this critical juncture in international politics. And I noticed recent comments by Dino Patidjalal on some of the constraints that Kemlu is facing in a direct appeal to Indonesian Foreign Minister Sugiono. Let me turn to the echidna or porcupine strategy. I work in the defence sector, and it's obvious that Australia must rapidly build its own sovereign military capabilities, including integrated air and missile defence, non-nuclear powered submarines, and asymmetric effects to deter a formidable adversary without the guarantee of US military support. These are fundamental problems, and there are fundamental problems with AUKUS Pillar 1 nuclear submarine programs in terms of the time frame, delivery of an AUKUS SSN by 2045, when this strategic environment is rapidly deteriorating before us. That is too far away. And there's tens of millions of dollars in down payments going to Washington, which effectively means less money for immediate defence capabilities. I think the Indonesian government too should look at its own force posture and reconsider the new order-inspired reorientation of the armed forces back to internal security and business interests. The impacts on military professionalism from legislative changes seen in the revised T&I law 2024, which have expanded T&I's reach further into the civilian domain. We think active T&I offices in state-owned enterprises, ministries, flagship national projects like Makan Bergizi Gratis, the food estates. This risks undermining T&I professionalism and preparedness. A larger force posture does not necessarily translate as the right force posture for the deteriorating external environment. Finally, final comments. Both countries need to prepare with haste for a Taiwan contingency. Doubts about US resolve over Taiwan in a new Western hemispheric foreign policy, in my opinion, make a full blockade or outright attack on Taiwan by China more likely, and could also increase Beijing's coercive, or ICAD, as the Philippines likes to use that acronym, ICAD activities in South China Sea, East China Sea, intensify that more generally. A crisis over Taiwan could escalate very quickly this year or next and result in a rupture in maritime trade routes, widespread economic disruption, and increased military assets transiting through Indonesia's sea lines of communication. Crisis coordination and planning, including cooperation on evacuation of nationals out of Taiwan, needs to be elevated. It may well be happening. I'm just not privy to those, more sensitive discussions in Canberra and Jakarta. Of course, there's around 350,000 Indonesian nationals in Taiwan. So this is of great concern for Indonesia if things deteriorate there. And I think my last comment is, while Australia's defence strategy rests on hope that this is not a fundamental disruption, as Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, has stated, but more of an aberration, and we'll go back to a more normal America post-Trump. But the problem is, as former senior Defence and Home Affairs official Mike Pizzullo characterised, that hope is not a strategy. We need a strategy, and we need to move quickly now. Indonesia too also needs greater strategic and foreign policy coherence, in my opinion, to act in the face of the external pressures building. So in conclusion, I'll stop there. There's great potential for intensified cooperation, and I think some really serious strategic threats that are emerging now for both of us. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibu Greta, for the very insightful analysis on the Indonesia-Australia relations and also China-Indonesia-Australia relations. Ibu Greta has explained how Australia's view on China is based on the strategic anxiety, and also Ibu Greta also explained about the perceptions of Australia to China, which characterized by seeing China's influence expand in the Southeast Asia, but also Ibu Greta argued that the China factors is not a source of friction between Indonesia and Australia. And at the last part of Ibu Greta's explanations also highlight the change in global international order, which the US is now is acting like a time to be the revisionist rather than the status quo. And but it is also interesting to see how Australia see Indonesia, which Prabowo's relations with Trump is getting closer, with Indonesia joined the board of peace regarding the Palestine conflict. And also Ibu Greta argued that Indonesia and Australia need foreign policy coherence and facing the external pressure. Thank you, Ibu Greta. The last speakers, but not least, Dr. Indriana Kartini. Dr. Indriana Kartini is a senior researcher at the Research Center for Politics, BRIM. She was the cluster coordinator for foreign policy and international issues. She obtained her Master of International Politics from the Faculty of Arts, the University of Melbourne, Australia. She received her PhD from the Political Science Study Program at the Universitas Indonesia. Her research interests are international politics, border studies, geopolitics in Indo-Pacific, regionalism, and sub-regionalism. In 2017, she was awarded a research grant from the Sumitomo Foundation for a project on Japan's public diplomacy in Indonesia. She is the editor and contributor of academic books, including Jokowi's Foreign Policy and Diplomatic Legacy, which is published recently in the Springer Nature, and Indonesian Foreign Policy Portrait in the Reform Era, published by Yayasan Pustaka Obor, and Strengthening the Cross-Border Connectivity in Sub-Regional Economic Cooperations, also published by Yayasan Pustaka Obor. Mbak Indri, screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Mario, for the honorable opportunity. I'm very happy to be one panel with Ibu Dewi, of course, our senior in BRIN, and also Ibu Greta, and also Mas Yeremia. Well, this is I'm very happy and I have many insightful thoughts from the keynote speakers and on two panel speakers that also enrich my perspectives, and also probably today my presentation also will be already highlights and already presented by Ibu Dewi, but I will in this session I will focus on Indonesia's strategic autonomy and the China-Australia Balancing Act. So I have two focus. Like first one is analyzing the Jakarta's approach to maintaining a strategic autonomy, intensifying the US-China rivalry, and also evaluates how Indonesia's hedging strategy affects its partnership with Australia. So let me begin with the background of the major power rivalry. We already have discussed a lot about this, but let me explain, because in these sessions where the participants not only from the international politics but also from national politics and local politics, that maybe we need to give a background for them. The geopolitical background of our discussion today is about the major power rivalry, about the rise of China that has reshaped the global balance of power, that intensifying the US-China rivalry in Indo-Pacific. So the following the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union, the international system was characterized by Pax Americana and a unipolar order, and China's emergence as a major power has increasingly challenged this order, generating strategic uncertainty. So next. So I would like to talk about navigating major power rivalry, especially for Indonesia. So while structural arguments like those advanced by Graham Allison's Destined for War, Can America and China Escape Thucydides' Trap, suggest that power transitions may increase confrontation. So Indonesia views conflict as neither inevitable nor desirable. So consistent with its long-standing principle of free and active foreign policy that already mentioned by Ibu Dewi, that Indonesia emphasizes strategic autonomy, the avoidance of bloc politics, and the promotion of inclusive regional cooperation. We're talking about the free and active foreign policy that being the a principle of Indonesian foreign policy that being upheld by Indonesia since 1948. The thoughts are really championing until now. It began by the statement of our late Vice President Muhammad Hatta about the free and active foreign policy. And according to these principles, that Indonesia committed to non-alignment and charting an independent course that projected nationalist confidence and ensured that it was a proactive agent in international affairs. And this free and active foreign policy also resembles in the 1945 Constitution's preamble that explicitly rejects colonialism and commits Indonesia to help build a global system founded on freedom, lasting peace, and social justice. And also, it was also highlighted in a pivotal moment in Indonesia's foreign policy. In 1955, Indonesia hosting the ASEAN African Conference in Bandung, where China also joined the ASEAN African Conference. And the ASEAN African Conference resulting Can Bandung principles that challenge bipolar divisions and advocated peaceful coexistence, and it directly led to the formation of the non-aligned movement in 1961. So faced with this dual imperative of engaging China and while guarding against its ambitions, Indonesia, like many in ASEAN, has adopted hedging strategy. So what is hedging strategy? In international relation theory, hedging occupies a middle ground on the spectrum between balancing and bandwagoning. So it's manifested through policies that combine selective engagement, calculated resistance, and partial difference. So in the context of facing the rise of China and the US-China rivalry, Indonesian elites developed a view of China and leading to a warm economic partnership. This is also due to the China's positive role in the 1997-1998 Asian financial crisis that demonstrated its value as an economic partner to Indonesia and Southeast Asia. So before that, the relationship between Indonesia and China was deteriorated because of the communist memory of Indonesia that also influenced to the negative sense to China. But because of the Asian financial crisis, it reflects and influenced the warm economic partnership with Indonesia. So before that, let me give you the charts about the investment. Sorry, Mas Arif. Yeah. So we can see from the charts that China is the major economic partners, although from the it's Singapore is the main investors countries in Indonesia, but China is in this chart is number 3, but Hong Kong is also part of China. So probably the second one. And we can see the US is number 5 and Australia is number 10. So we can see that why China become the major economic partners in Indonesia due to its investments in Indonesia that already mentioned by Bu Dewi, also our Mas Jeremia about the China's investments in Indonesia. So next. So I'm gonna talk about the under Jokowi's administration. So under Jokowi's administration, Indonesia still continued its free and active doctrine that tried to navigate the complexity of the relationship with China. So economically, it embraced partnerships like the BRI, already mentioned by Mas Jeremia, and yet strategically, it viewed China's military growth and actions, such as its maritime presence in the Nathan Sea, with deep suspicion as signs of expansionism. So the BRI in Indonesia has sparked public and elite skepticism in Indonesia, and this stems from I could mention about 2 factors. The first is the fears of economic dependency, were exemplified by the use of Chinese labor and market dominance under the ASEAN-China Free Trade Area. And the second one is the direct sovereignty challenge, as China's claim in the Natuna Sea overlap with nearly 1/3 of Indonesia's maritime territory. Okay, next. So in response to these perceived threats, Indonesia adopted dual strategy. The first one is reinforce its sovereignty in the Natuna through military infrastructure and symbolic acts, like rename its economic zone in the North Natuna Sea and build a base on Natuna Besar Island. And the second one is strengthening defense partnership with the US, engaging in over 240 annual joint exercises and modernizing its navy with equipment from Western allies like Italy and France, the Rafale. But we can see here that from the last 10 years, from 2015 to 2024, Indonesia conducted no fewer than 17 bilateral military exercises with the US, encompassing both combat-oriented operations and also humanitarian assistance and disaster relief missions. So 5 of these exercises were held in strategically locations like the North Natuna Sea and the Sulu Sea. And in 2022, Indonesia broadened the scope of the bilateral Garuda Shield exercise by upgrading to Super Garuda Shield, a multilateral exercise involving several US allies, including Australia, France, Japan, the UK, and South Korea. And also, Indonesia hosted the annual Cooperation Offload Readiness and Training exercise with sustained participation from the US Navy. Next. So that was during the Jokowi's presidency. So during Prabowo, Indonesia still applying the hedging strategy, like continuing the traditions started by President Jokowi, that making China the first country he visited after taking office in 2024. And also in the economic sphere, Indonesia also adopts a hedging strategy. Like the first one is maintaining a positive stance toward Chinese-led institutions like IIB, and also cultivating ties with US-led alternatives such as the IPEF, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity in 2024. So from here, we can see Indonesia try to implement this hedging strategy, although in President Prabowo, he made a maneuver that's controversial enough in the case of the Natuna Sea by made an MOU with China in the, like already mentioned by Ibu Greta, but our Kemlu already make a statement that Indonesia still uphold the UNCLOS, and also we're not having the border with China in the Natuna Sea. Okay, next one. So I would like to discuss here about the balancing act strategy. So after we discussing about how Indonesia applying the hedging strategy between China, U.S.-China rivalry, I would like to move on to the how this hedging strategy also affected to the with Australian Indonesia-Australian partnerships. So so about this U.S.-China rivalry that also implicate with the Indonesia's partnership with Australia. In my opinion, that while Australia has aligned itself with the U.S. as part of its response to the China's rise through the Quad and AUKUS, Indonesia still continue to pursue a foreign policy of strategic autonomy grounded in principle of free and active. So this divergence in strategic posture presents both challenges and opportunities for bilateral cooperation. So next, for Indonesia, partnership with Australia is as best as found through pragmatic, issue-based cooperation like in maritime security, humanitarian assistance, and disaster relief, counter-terrorism, and regional capacity building while avoiding alliance entanglement. So these partnerships implemented in the latest one is the joint defense agreement signed in 2024 when President Prabowo as the Minister of Defense, and also the through the IA-CEPA signed in 2020. So and the second one is the strengthening ASEAN-led mechanism, like ASEAN centrality, like promoting inclusive Indo-Pacific cooperation that allow Indonesia and Australia manage the differences and mitigate the risk of the great power rivalry, and reinforce the partnership as a stabilizing force in the region. So next one, I would like to focus on the response to Quad and AUKUS, because this is also the crucial topic in Indonesian foreign policy. For those who want to know about the Quad and AUKUS, so in 2017, the US, Australia, India, and Japan revived the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue that established originally in 2007, but inactive, and then its revitalization, as we can see and interpret it as an effort to contain the rising of China. And in September 2021, the United States announced the new security arrangement among Australia, UK, and United States as AUKUS. So through AUKUS, Australia is set to acquire nuclear-powered submarines, enhancing its naval capabilities. And these developments point to the emergence of US-led strategic alignment aimed at balancing China's growing influence in Indo-Pacific. Next. Indonesian response to AUKUS is quite different between the Quad and AUKUS. On AUKUS, Indonesia reaction is critical because its concerns are related to the nuclear proliferations, regional arms competition, and the transfer of nuclear-powered submarine technology to a non-nuclear weapon state. So Indonesia initially opposed the Australia's nuclear-powered submarine program and advocated for stronger international safeguards under the NPT and IAEA. But in contrast, Indonesia adopted more cautious and understated approach toward the Quad, refraining from official statements for many years. and viewing the grouping with ambivalence rather than open opposition. But this contrast reflects Indonesia's broader foreign policy preference for strategic autonomy, non-alignment, and ASEAN centrality. And consequently, Indonesia introduced its own Indo-Pacific concept in 2019 and subsequently adopted as the ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific. Next. In this slide, I would like to highlight about this is the result of our team from foreign policy. The coordinator team is by Emil, but already also here. So in 2022, the Research Center for Politics, BRIN, conducted a survey examining elite perception of Indo-Pacific geopolitical dynamics. So the findings reveal that there's a shift toward more favorable elite views of the Quad and AUKUS. So a majority of respondents in the survey on Indonesia's position amid US-China rivalry in the Indo-Pacific agreed that the Quad, there are 61% respondents, and the AUKUS around 64%, agreed that the Quad and AUKUS affects Indonesia's national interests positively by contributing to regional stability. So this survey interesting because we can see that there is a shift regarding the view on the Quad and AUKUS, as reflected in the survey that the Quad evolved significantly, and Indonesian elite perspectives on the grouping shifted accordingly. So, and also this finding also related to in the second term of President Jokowi's pragmatic foreign policy, that in his statement that the Quad and AUKUS should be seen as partners rather than rivals. And also we found that during President Prabowo became the Minister of Defense, Prabowo also have a positive view on the AUKUS. So I would like to conclude that despite the differing strategic orientations, the Indonesia-Australia partnerships remain essential for regional stability. So both countries share an interest in preventing major power rivalry from destabilizing Southeast Asia and sustaining an inclusive, rules-based regional order. And to this end, the partnership should be strengthened through pragmatic cooperation and sustained dialogue rather than alliance convergence. Thank you very much. I will stop here.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Indriana Kartini, for your very comprehensive presentations and so insightful. Dr. Indriana Kartini has explained about how the major power rivalry context has challenged the international order, and also Indonesia rejects the inevitability of conflict and also emphasizing the strategic autonomy and inclusive cooperations. Mbak Indri also explained about the hedging strategy and how Indonesia responds to Quad and AUKUS, and she concluded with that despite divergent strategic orientations, Indonesia-Australia relations are essential for regional stability, and also there are shared interests, and partnerships should be strengthened through the pragmatic cooperation. Now we will proceed to the Q&A sessions. If there are any questions from the audience, please use the raise hand. Mbak Emil, yeah, Mbak Emil, please.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. I enjoy presentation from Ibu Dewi, Greta, Indri, and also Yere. I have one question for Greta. what do you have in mind that China is pouring more dollar in the region, Southeast Asian region, than the US and Australia in general? That's it. Thank you.
Look, I think it's the reality, but Amelia, I think it is just the reality. I think Masieri said before about that Jokowi stated, was it fast and precise? Chinese investment is fast and precise. It's very difficult for obviously a smaller country like Australia to compete with that, but it's just the reality for a whole range of different variables and factors that China is a ready, proximate investment partner. So it's a reality that we just have to contend with. I guess in terms of Australia's contribution, there are nice synergies. There are niche roles, but we can never compete on the scale of Chinese investment and business activity. It's not possible. It's just a reality we have to deal with.
Thank you, Greta. Any questions from other participants? There is a question from Dr. Ganewati, Professor Ganewati Uriandari, who joining via the YouTube channel. The question is, Australia's foreign policy differs from Indonesia's, where Australia relies heavily on its main ally, the United States, leading to the praise all the way to LBG, with the recent shift in American policy under Trump, which appears to devalue its traditional allies. What will Australia's future policy be? Will this also change Australia's policy towards China, which has previously been driven by concern about the yellow peril threat? And to what extent will it impact its relationship with Indonesia? I think this question is addressed to Ibu Greta.
Thank you, Mario. I think, and I'd like to open it up to some other speakers to comment. I think, I guess I'd make a slight distinction there. In Australian foreign policy relies on the US alliance. I would be perhaps more precise to say Australian strategic policy relies more on US as an ally. And when I mean strategic policy, I mean the application and use of military force and fundamentally armed forces. So I think Australian foreign policy is much more diverse, and you know, I think certainly there are other parts of the world apart from the US that are priorities for Australian foreign policy. Certainly in terms of strategic alliances, yes, through ANZUS, Five Eyes and other commitments. I think it's caused profound concern the way that the Trump administration is treating its allies and partners alike. I think it will inevitably lead to some quite substantive shifts in Australia's strategic and foreign policy approach. I would just pick up on the yellow peril. I think that's long, apart from extremist groups, you know, in Australia, I think perceptions of a yellow peril are long gone. You know, Australia's been integrated into East Asia for decades now, and as I said, we have a high proportion of people, Australians of Indian and Chinese descent, so a very significant Asian community in Australia. As anyone would know who studied in Brisbane, Melbourne, Sydney, and any city, it's very Asian now in Australia. But look, I think something interesting, it remains to be seen in Australia, but you notice Canada had a very troubled relationship with China, and then Mark Carney, the Prime Minister, has recently been into Beijing. So this is going in China's favour if they play it carefully, because China can posit itself as a more reliable, attractive status quo partner, almost in contrast to, as I said, a rogue, you know, highly unpredictable US. And the other thing I just note in Australia too, you know, there's increasing concern about democratic regression in the US, and I haven't seen the latest polling, but a lot of Australians are very uneasy about the direction of US domestic politics, and kind of a more authoritarian mode. So a lot going on. I think it will result in substantive shifts in Australia, but it remains to be seen yet. But I'd certainly welcome comments by other panelists on that.
Can I jump in to Greta's remarks?
Sure, Mas Yere, please.
I'm not an expert of Australian foreign policy, but I'm trained as an international relations, and I observe foreign policy conducts of many different nations. I think it is quite certain that Australia's strategic alliance with the Western world, if I may say, is certainly a context of upon which Australia conducts its foreign policy. But I don't think so in this kind of, it's like a more complex world. This is like the sole determinant factors of Australian foreign policy. Of course, Australian has a great interest in expanding its engagement with Southeast Asia, especially its closest neighbor, Indonesia. And I think there is still enough room for Australia to explore and how to make sure the bilateral relations with Indonesia certainly contribute positively to Australian national interests. And actually, the title of this webinar is kind of interesting in one way, but putting China as a factor is very somehow provocative, yes. But please, let's not prevent ourselves to really identify if we exclude China from the calculations. Of course, it is somehow impossible. But what would be like the genuine interest from both sides, from Jakarta and Canberra, in managing the relations? Of course, China will be the Jakarta's relations with Beijing and Canberra relations with Beijing will be the context, again, will be the background for us to calculate our national interest. But what would be the our own calculations about the Indonesia-Australia relations itself? I'm sure I agree that let's not juxtapose Beijing and Canberra in our worldview, but let's identify what would be our genuine interest in conducting relations with Australia. I think the maritime sector provides a lot of opportunity. People-to-people exchange has been the strength of Indonesia-Australia relations, and I think there has been so many exciting initiatives by the Australian in promoting people-to-people exchange, academic exchange with Australia. I think it's something that I really want to put emphasis, because even China could not compete academic operations between Indonesia and Australia in this situations. Yeah, so it's totally we need to let's identify what would be our interest in managing the bilateral relations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mas Yere.
May I add just a little bit?
Yeah.
I've been reading about this, Greta, and clearly there's some a better term. Yeah, I've been reading the debates in Canberra while the US-Australia relations. Hold on a minute.
Or while we are waiting,
Yeah.
Ibu Dewi, are you there? Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Because I was having problem doing the presency, so I turned off my mobile phone. So clearly this is a crisis of significant proportions among US allies at the moment. For Australia, the US alliance is not just about security issues. it's very much part of its own identity. Australia, US alignment, is very much part of its strategic makeup, in the same way that Indonesia's free and active foreign policy principle is not a strategy. It's also part of national identity. And so when the US behaves, as Ibu Greta pointedly said, about becoming a rogue state, is this an aberration of the Trump administration, or is this something that is going to be systemic in the future, that after Trump, he is there going to be a truly changed US? And we are not sure yet. The jury is still out about that, because the fact of the matter is that Trump was democratically elected, and with an interregnum in between. So that means that there are large numbers of Americans out there who share that ideology. He didn't suddenly come from Mars and get worshipped by the public. But he was voted, and the MAGA ideology is something that many believe is profoundly changing. This is a reflection of the transformation of American society. So this is not just the usual shift, democratic, Republicans, more big government, less government interventions in the economy, more global engagement with multilateralism, and less global engagement, etc., etc. So this is a subject for a different seminar. So maybe the US factors in Indonesia-Australia relations, I think, because that needs to be discussed. Maybe that should be the next topic, Mario. But secondly, I think that the Canberra is having a serious discussion that they cannot simply abandon something that is so core to its identity, but we have to live in a real world now, and hope is not a strategy. So while it's still there, the US, we continue to hope. Indonesia, as mentioned by Indriana's very excellent and comprehensive presentations. Thank you. That was really well done. All the exercises and so on. Will not want to abandon the Super Garuda Shield. Will not want to abandon, this very strong anchor. Indonesia has free and active foreign policy, but we hedges. And close alignment, close economic cooperation with China, but also ensuring that the United States remains engaged in the region as well, security-wise, but also economically. This is, and that means greater agency for us. In Australia, in the past, you have to worry about China, but you don't have to worry about the United States. For Indonesia, we don't trust any great powers. That is our DNA. For Indonesia, great powers look at the world from their own national perspectives. Other countries are just collateral damage. So it is never centered on the interests of their lesser allies. That's why Vice President Hatta said, never hitch your fate to the wagon of a great power. So why do we fight for our independence only to then become subservient to a great power? So for Indonesia, that is our DNA. And in this sense, I think that while not persuading Australia to divorce the United States, because we cannot and do not want to divorce the United States. The United States is not just an Atlantic power, it is an Indo-Pacific power. It has legitimate geographic presence here. Its coastline in the west coast of America, faces the Pacific, and most of its trades now with the Indo-Pacific countries. But at this time, sometimes, we feel that, as Mark Carney talks about, we want an inclusive multilateralism, not a multilateralism based on hegemony anymore, not just the P5 countries, and in fact, one country deciding whatever it wants to do. So I think that this is a multilateral moment that we need to defend multilateralism. We need to defend rules of law, including the Indo-Pacific region. by having greater agency to middle power, and maybe you mentioned about regional cooperation going up at the to a higher multilateral engagement. So we engage with other regions as well. So, but this is that's why this is an interesting moment where the strategic questioning in Australia would push Australia closer to its Pacific identity, or I mean to the East Asian identity, to its Indo-Pacific identity. That that's just my take.
Thank you, Ibu Dewi. Well, Mas Yere has addressed the questions on the message. Mbak Indri, maybe you want to add or any comments? No. Okay.
Read one questions about the top generals of China.
Okay. So actually the webinar is scheduled until 12, but then it's already 15 past 12. So thank you very much for all the speakers, Ibu Dewi Fortuna Anwar, and then Mas Yeremia Ralisang, Ibu Greta Napskeller, Ibu Indriana Kartini, for your very insightful presentations and also comments. And thank you for all the distinguished participants who join us on the Zoom today. Please follow the social media of the Research Center for Politics for the upcoming webinars and discussions. Thank you very much. See you in the next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you
all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hope to see you again.
Ya, see you Mas Yere. Thank you.
Terima kasih Bu Dewi, Mas Mario, Mbak Indri, Mbak Emil, semua, Bu
Terima kasih, Mbak
Gane.
Indri. Saya link.